Hello, how are you? Now that we are getting to the end of the year, the best books of the year lists are coming thick and fast. And I've been looking at a lot of these different lists and making video reactions to them. I think it's just really fun and interesting to see what are being lauded as the best books of the year. And it's giving me some suggestions of what I should catch up and read over the Christmas holidays. And the New York Times just published their 10 best books of the year list. But they've also done a sort of retrospective looking at some previous years, and they basically had the same format since 2004, where they put out 10 of their best books of the year, 5 fiction and 5 nonfiction. So I thought it'd be sort of interesting, in addition to looking at their current year's list, to then go back year by year and see which of these books on the previous, best books of the year lists still stick out in my mind, or that I've read, or that I've even heard of, because obviously this is an American list, and I live in the UK. I've lived in England for the past 20 years. So some of these books naturally just I'm not as aware of. And I'm only going to look at the fiction books because that's mainly what I read. And so I'm not as familiar with the nonfiction books. So starting off in 2020, looking at their 5 best books of fiction, there's A Children's Bible by Lydia Millet. And this has been appearing on a lot of different lists. And it was listed for the National Book Award this year, and I'm really keen on the story. Children who are quite mature that are taken on a holiday to a big mansion by a lake, and they feel quite oppressed by the adults who are minding them, and so they decide to go off by themselves into an increasingly dystopian type landscape, I think, and sort of things sort of spiral out from there, and I just really like the sound of that story, and since it's been getting so much praise, it's one that I do want to get to. Then there is Deacon King Kong by James McBride, which again has been on a lot of lists, and it was an Oprah's book club choice this year, so it's been a very popular novel, and it's about in the 60s, a church deacon walks up and assassinates a drug dealer in a community, and it follows the different stories of people surrounding this crime, this shooting, and how it affects them. And I think it's meant to be quite like a funny novel, as well as dealing with some serious social issues. And so, I really like the sound of that. Then there is Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, which won the Women's Prize for Fiction this year, and I've talked about a number of times. I think I like the UK cover better than the US cover. I just think it's more classy and beautiful. And I know it was published under a different title in Canada as well, I think, which was quite strange. And this is about a boy in Shakespeare, Elizabethan. I was going to say Shakespearean, but it was Shakespearean times. Basically involves Shakespeare's son, who gets very ill because of a pandemic going around Europe and the world during that time, and his death, and how this perhaps inspired him to name his famous play Hamlet. And so sort of the origin stories of that, but moves away from Shakespeare, following much more the story of Mother Agnes and his sisters in the family, and how it affects them, and the grief that they feel. And it is such a moving, beautifully written novel. I mean, I didn't love this novel as much as some other people have loved it. I've talked about my sort of issues with it, but I do agree it's an absolutely wonderful novel, and it's been great to see it getting so much praise, and that more people are reading Maggie O'Farrell's previous novels as well. There is Homeland, Elegies by Akhtar, another novel which has been appearing on so many best books of the year lists, and though I've heard some quite mixed things about it from people here on BookTube and speaking to people in real life. So it's described as part family drama, part social essay, and part picaresque adventure, and it takes place in post 9/11 America, where a lot of people's lives have been devastated by debt, And the novel takes an interesting form in that it's part autobiographical and part fictional. It sort of blends the two together. I've seen some reviews that describe it more as a collection of essays or a memoir rather than a novel. So I think it sort of takes a interesting form, which I think is always really intriguing. So I am quite keen to read it myself just to see what I'll make of it and what I'll think of it. So I hope to get to that before the end of the year. Then there is The Vanishing Half by Brit, Bennett. And again, I think I sort of prefer the UK cover to the US cover. And I like them both, but yeah, this is shiny as well. And I absolutely love this novel. I'm so glad to see it's been so successful. I don't know why it hasn't been up for more awards. It really should have been, or should have won more awards, because yeah, it's an incredible story of two sisters, of light-skinned African-American sisters who grow up in the same sort of southern community, which is largely populated by light-skinned African-Americans, and they go off to lead very different lives. And the story is so moving and gripping and insightful about family life and different forms of identity and what identity means, you know, whether we are sort of born being who we are, or if we can evolve and change and sort of form our own identities. I just thought it was so moving how it describes the many different kinds of that process. So I'm sure you've heard about this novel before, but I'd highly recommend reading it if you've not read it yet. So that is the list for 2020. Then looking back to 2019, so fairly recently, there is Disappearing Earth by Julia Phillips. And I did hear about this novel quite a lot at the time, but it's just a novel that I don't think it might not have even been published in England, or at least I didn't see it get a publication. So yeah, I didn't get a chance to read it when it came out. There's The Topeka School by Ben Lerner, which is a novel I really meant to read and get to, because I remember that appeared on so many different lists as well. There is Lost Children Archive by Valeria Luiselli, which I absolutely loved. It's another novel that takes a really interesting structure in form, and it's basically a road trip novel, but is so insightful, like about family, but also about larger social conditions in America. And again, this is another novel that I think I sort of prefer the UK cover over the US cover, but that's just sort of my point of view. And there is also Night Boat to Tangier by Kevin Barry, who is a great Irish novelist. And I really enjoyed this novel, but I'm sort of surprised to see it appear on a list like this. And I thought it was an excellently written novel. It's sort of like a Beckett play almost in the structure and style of it. But it like looks at these sort of bigger existential questions of these two aging men who are sort of former gangsters, and how one of their daughters has gone missing in their search for her. And so I thought it was quite poignant and emotional, but yeah, I'm just sort of surprised that it didn't stick out, you know, to me personally as one of my favorite books of last year. There's also Exhalation by Ted Chiang, which I have been reading this year. The short stories in it, which are almost like philosophical in their content, even though they have a almost sci-fi type structure. And I keep reminding myself I want to go back and finish reading the stories in this collection, because I've been enjoying them so much and finding them such like interesting nuggets to sort of chew over, these sort of like thoughtful nuggets to chew over all of the ideas and the stories. Next, going back to 2018, there is Asymmetry by Lisa Halliday, which is a novel I really meant to get to and to read, and I still have a copy of it on my shelf, so this reminds me I want to get back to reading that. And the same goes for The Great Believers by Rebecca Mackay as well, which is, I think, a story about sort of the AIDS crisis and a number of people level affected by it. And that's another novel that's been sitting on my shelves and that I want to get to, but just haven't yet. There's The Perfect Nanny by Leila Slimani, which was actually called Lullaby here in the UK. And it was a novel I enjoyed, but it's another novel that I'm sort of surprised to see on their top list. It's basically a thriller in its structure, but it does provide a lot of social commentary as well, about a nanny who basically executes the children that she's looking after, and it goes back into her story about why she might have done this and the struggles she was having. I did find it really moving and really effective, but yeah, it just personally doesn't stick out in my mind as one of the best novels from that year. There's also There by Tommy Orange, another novel that's been sitting on my shelf since then. I always go sort of on a book buying spree towards the end of the year of, when books like this appear on multiple lists and that I want to get to, but just didn't get around to actually reading them yet. They're just sort of sitting on my shelves. And then finally there is Washington Black by S.A. Adugin, the novel that I was hoping would win the Booker Prize that year. It was shortlisted for the prize that year, and it didn't. I know not everyone loved it, but I did. I just thought it was so effective and wonderful, and it's basically a slave narrative, but also an adventure story. And the way she tells the story and the way she gets into the psychology of the central character of Washington Black, I thought was so movingly done. I really connected with it, and I just loved it. And I'm looking forward to reading more by S.A. Adugin. I hope she publishes more as well. Then looking back to 2017, first off, there's Autumn by Ali Smith, the first novel in her seasonal quartet, which of course ended this year with Summer, a novel I loved so much. And I love the entire quartet. I think it's such a monumental achievement and a wonderful retrospective looking back on these 4 crucial years of history, and but as well, like, wonderful storytelling, such a fascinating range of characters which sort of connect with each other over the course of the 4 novels, or have connections with each other in various and interesting ways. And the way she builds various stories within stories, and I'm a huge fan of her work, and so just loved this. Then it's interesting to see there's Exit West by Mohsin Hamid, which was a very controversial novel. I know a lot of people really didn't like it. I remember this sort of like taking me back, to different literary conversations from earlier years, and this was a year when I was really getting involved with talking about books online with other people, and just seeing so much controversy about this novel. Personally, I thought it was quite interesting. It's one of those novels that works more as like an interesting idea, I think, than a sort of satisfying story. So I did enjoy it. But I know, a lot of people didn't. Then there's Pachinko by Minjin Lee, which is another novel that I sort of bought at the time because everyone was talking about it and there was a lot of praise for it, and it's just been sitting on my shelves still. I need to get to it. There's The Power by Naomi Alderman, which won the Women's Prize for Fiction that year, and which I did personally love and I thought was excellent, really, really great. But it's another novel I know was slightly controversial. Not everyone loved it as much as I did. And there's Sin Unburied Sin by Jesmyn Ward, which was also shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction that year. A lot of people's personal top books of the year, but I didn't love it as much as other people did. I thought there were some very moving scenes in it, but my resounding feeling from it was that it was good, but just not great. Although I did sort of warm to it more when I went to the Women's Prize shortlist readings that year and heard Jesmyn Ward read from it, and it gave me a really different perspective and insight into the story. Just like the tone of her voice as she read it, I thought was so effective and moving and really drew me into it. So I'd love to, I don't know if she narrated the audiobook of it, but I would love to read the book by listening to the audiobook, because I think that might give me a slightly different perspective on that novel. Then going back to 2016, there is The Association of Small Bombs by Karan Majan, which was a novel I know a lot of people talked about at the time, about a bomb that went off on a terrorist attack and killed two brothers, and sort of follows the story of their friend as well as some other characters. And it's a novel that I meant to read at the time, but just didn't get around to. There's The Northwater by Ian McGuire, which I'm so happy to see on this list because I thought this was a tremendous novel. It's another novel that's basically a thriller, but is also really psychologically insightful and looking at sort of different kinds of forms of masculinity. It's a very like masculine story. It's about a seafaring ship going into the Arctic, and then there's various skirmishes between people on board and following their different stories, and it's so thrilling and really evocative and atmospheric and wonderful. I just loved it. And he had a new novel out this year, which I've still not read, and I keep meaning to get to. So I'm hoping to read that soon. There's also The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead, which I think won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction that year, or was it the National Book Award? Or maybe it was both. But yeah, it was a much lauded novel, and rightfully so. I think it's a brilliant concept for a novel, but it's almost like Exit West, where there's such a strong concept to the novel. But this, I felt like it really delivered emotionally as well. I was so drawn into the story and really gripped by it. I know some people had some slight issues with because there's a female protagonist of the story, and people sort of felt that was slightly artificial how he did that, but personally I didn't feel that way. I thought it was so effective. There's also The Vegetarian by Han Kan on the list, which was so wonderful that year to see this breakout novel from Korea that was a very like personal, very intimate story that became so popular and so well read. I thought it was an incredible novel too. I thought it was so moving how it was done, a sort of portrait of a woman's life from various different perspectives, but you don't get her own perspective sort of crucially. And I thought it was so moving how it did that. There's also War and Turpentine, which I've not really heard of. I don't remember that being talked about much at the time, and I don't really know anything about that novel. So if you've read that and would recommend that, let me know in the comments below. Then going back to 2015, there's The Door by Magda Szabo, which is a novel I've been wanting to read, particularly this year, because there was a new reprint of the novel in this sort of small pocket size edition, a really beautiful reprint of it. And I know a lot of the people, when I did a haul of this book, were really recommending it strongly. So yeah, it's one I do definitely want to read, and I hope won't just languish on my shelves for ages like a lot of other books have. There's also a manual for cleaning women by Lucia Berlin, which I know got a lot of press at the time and a lot of people were talking about it. I read some of the stories and meant to go back and finish reading them, but with like a lot of collections of short stories, it's quite easy to, I think, read a few of them and then just not go back to them and finish them, but I would like to do that. There's also Outline by Rachel Cusk, a novel a lot of people were talking about at the time, and which I enjoyed and appreciated, but yeah, it's another one of those books where I appreciated the concept more than the story itself. I felt like she intentionally emotionally distances you from the protagonist that you're sort of seeing the story through and just seeing everyone react to her. And I know people sort of feel that this sort of made it more emotional in a way because you just get other people's perspective on her and their assumptions about her and the way that they talk to her and react to her, rather than you getting her own thoughts and her own reactions to things. But yeah, it just didn't really work for me like in an emotional way. So I appreciated it, but also felt it was too tightly controlled in a way. Then there's The Sellout by Paul Beatty, which won the Booker Prize that year, and which I enjoyed and appreciated, but yeah, really hasn't stuck with me, and I thought probably wasn't the right winner that year. Personally, I felt And there's the story of The Lost Child by Elena Ferrante, which is book 4 in that series of novels. And I've not read any of them yet, and quite guiltily. And so, yeah, I know I need to go back and read that. I just want to have like a good block of time when I can just sort of plunge into all of the novels and enjoy Elena Ferrante's novels. So hoping to get some time to do that. Then going back to 2014, there's All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr, which is a novel I know a lot of people loved and were talking about at the time, and I just didn't get to. I just never got around to reading it myself. There's Department of Speculation by Jenny Offal, which I loved so much. I thought was such an inventive way of looking at the breakdown of a marriage and a relationship and an individual's life, really, in sort of different snippets, and yeah, how she structured that I thought was so effective and moving. There's Euphoria by Lily King, a novel I didn't get around to reading, though I heard about it at the time. And I think she had another novel out this year. And also, of course, Jenny Offal published Weather this year, which has been appearing on a number of different lists and which I loved so much, was one of my favorite books of the year. And there's Family Life by Akhil Sharma, which recently I've been hearing reference to this novel, and one that I haven't read, but that I want to get to reading. There's also Redeployment by Phil Clay, a novel I've not really heard of before, so I don't really know anything about, and so it's making me very nostalgic now, looking back on this year. And 2014 was the year I started blogging and getting into more online discussions about books, and so it's really interesting to see how I was definitely aware of a lot more of these books, even if I didn't read all of them. It's interesting, sort of joining into online bookish discussions, how you just become so much more aware of the books that everyone is talking about and that are being lauded a lot more, whereas previously, like, I hadn't been so much, even though I was always a really big reader. So it's interesting looking back on 2013, and there's a novel like Americana, which I read when it came out and absolutely loved. So brilliant. It's such a great novel, and she's such a tremendous writer, and it's also slightly sad to look back and see this was the last full-length novel that she published. There's a siren going on outside. Why hasn't she published another novel since then? I know she's been doing a lot of activist work. She's published a couple of short books regarding feminism since then, which are really important. It's really wonderful, all the work she's been doing, but I want another novel by Adichie. It's been too long, Then there is The Flamethrowers by Rachel Kushner, which I haven't read, but I did read The Mars Room, which she's published subsequently, which I had really mixed feelings about, so I'm not quite so keen to go back. And if you feel like The Flamethrowers is a better novel, let me know, because, I'd be interested to know people's thoughts about that. This was also the year of The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt, which I read this, I think, over the course of a few days. It's quite a thick, long novel, but I just was so gripped by it and completely enthralled. And so I know there's a lot of love out there for Donna Tartt, and I think it's deserved. And also it's interesting to look back. This was her last novel that she's written. So I think it usually takes about a decade to get a new Donna Tartt novel. So we're almost there. I think we're almost due for another novel by Donna Tartt. Hopefully we'll see another one. There's also Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, which I haven't read. The only Kate Atkinson novel I've read is A God in Ruins, which was sort of a sequel to this novel where it follows some of the same characters, and I loved that so much, and I want to go back and reread this and read more of Kate Atkinson's work, because I think she's a tremendous writer. There's also The 10th of Decembers by George Saunders, which was a book of short stories I was aware at the time a lot of people were talking about and lauded, and I tried to read. I just couldn't get into them, but I have read and absolutely loved Lincoln in the Bardo since then, and so I do want to go back and read some of his short fiction, because I think I'll sort of, now that I sort of get his style more, I think I'll appreciate his short fiction a lot more now if I go back and read it. Then going to 2012, There's Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. And of course, we had the conclusion to that Thomas Cromwell trilogy this year with The Mirror and the Light, and which obviously I didn't read at the time because I hadn't read Wolf Hall, because I tried a couple of times and just couldn't get along with it, or couldn't get into the historical aspect of it. I felt too sort of lost at sea, and so this year finally I've read the entire trilogy, and was tremendous. I really took the time and concentrated on it, and but finally got into it and thought it was so extraordinary. I just loved it. And so yeah, I sort of, I'm like kicking my earlier self for not, taking the time to really get into it. But you get to books when you get to them. I think if I'd tried to force myself at the time when it didn't feel right for me, I probably would have, just wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. And so I think it's important to, leave books to enjoy when, you get to them. There's also Building Stories by Chris Ware, a graphic novel, which I really have wanted to read, because I read his novel Jimmy Corrigan, which I thought was extraordinary and very moving. And so, I would really like to read this and get a copy of it. I need to get a copy of it. So then there is A Hologram for the King by David Eggers. I think I've read one novel by him, and was it The Circle? Did he write The Circle? Yes, he did. I had to look it up just to make sure. Didn't want to sound stupid. He did write The Circle, which I did read and enjoy, but I didn't think was that extraordinary. I don't know. Then there's NW by Zadie Smith, which I think is the only novel by Zadie Smith that I haven't read. I know some people have said, I think this is her most structurally interesting novel. I would be really keen to go back and read it. And then there's The Yellow Birds by Kevin Powers, a novel I've not read. But I've been slightly hesitant about reading it because I think some people called it sort of pretentious at the time. I don't know if it actually is. Let me know if you have any thoughts about it in the comments below. Then looking back to 2011, starting with The Art of Fielding by Chad Harbach, which I loved so much. I thought it was an incredible novel, very moving, very gripping, really wonderfully done. I don't know if he's written anything since then. If he has, let me know, because I think he's a wonderful writer. There's also 11/22/63 by Stephen King, which I've not read, and I'm just not really that drawn to reading any Stephen King fiction anymore. I read him a lot when I was younger, but not so much recently. I know this is sort of a different kind of novel, obviously embedded in history, a historical novel, but I haven't read him recently. Then there's Swamplandia by Karen Russell, a novel I've been really meaning to read, though I don't have a copy of it. It's another novel I need to get a copy of, because it's a novel I remember hearing about at the time, even though it was so long ago. It was almost 10 years ago, but one that I've been wanting to get to. There's 10,000 Saints by Eleanor Henderson, novel I haven't heard of, don't really recall any mention of that. And there's The Tiger's Wife by Taya Obrecht, a novel which won the Women's Prize for Fiction that year, and which I enjoyed and appreciated, but hasn't really stuck out in my mind so much. Then going back to 2010, there is Freedom by Jonathan Franzen. The thing I remember most about this is that when it was announced as an Oprah's book club choice, controversially, since there was all the hoopla about her choosing the corrections for that choice, and his sort of snobbish reaction to that, and her announcing it as the choice, and she announced freedom on her show, which was hilarious. And I really enjoyed this story, and another novel I just sort of sunk in, sort of with Donna Tartt. I just sort of raced through the story and read it all, even though it's quite a long novel. There's The New Yorker Stories by Anne Beatty, and I've not read these. I have read a lot of Anne Beatty's short fiction before and really enjoy it. I think she's a wonderful writer. Room by Emma Donoghue, which was absolutely gripping and terrifying and wonderful. It's great. I'm in the middle of reading her new novel, The Pull of the Stars, at the moment. I think she's a wonderful writer, and it was a really great film as well, the film of Room. There's also Selected Stories by William Trevor. I think I have read, maybe I did read these stories. I just don't remember them all that strongly. I know I have read some of his fiction before, but yeah, and there's A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan, a novel I've been really meaning to go back and read because I've not read it, though I really enjoyed her novel Manhattan Beach, which she published subsequently. And and I just heard such great things about this novel. And it's a novel that I meant to read with a physical book club that I formed at the end of last year, and we were due to meet again this year. But then, because of the pandemic, we haven't been able to meet again. And so I tried to form a physical book club again, and then it just sort of fell apart when the world fell apart, as it did this year. And we were going to read A Visit from the Goon Squad. So yeah, I'm regretful that didn't happen, but I still want to read it. Then going back to 2009, Both Ways is the Only Way I Want It by Mal Malloy. I read another novel by hers, but haven't read this one, and really enjoyed her fiction. So yeah, I would like to read this. There's Chronic City by Jonathan Lethem, another great writer, which I've read some other of his fiction, but I've not read this. And the same goes for Laurie Moore, Gate at the Stairs. I've read some of her other fiction, but not read this one. I think this might have won the Women's Prize for Fiction that year. Is that right? But yeah, I haven't read it yet. So yeah, I do need to go back and correct that and read that novel. There's Half Broke Horses, a true life novel by Jeanette Walls. I've not really heard of that. And the same goes with The Short History of Women by Kate Walbert. I don't remember hearing about that novel. So those might have been novels that have sort of made more of a splash in the US than they did here in the UK. Going back to 2008, there's Dangerous Laughter, 13 Stories by Stephen Milhauser. I haven't read those. A Mercy by Toni Morrison, one of her final novels, and yeah, one I didn't get around to reading. Netherland by Joseph O'Neill. I've not read that. 2666 by Roberto Bellano. Novel I know was talked about so much at the time, but is quite a thick, intimidating novel, and I think that's probably why I didn't get around to reading it myself, though I would really like to. There's Unaccustomed Earth by Jhumpa Lahiri, which I haven't read, but I've read other novels by her and really enjoy her fiction. I think she's such a powerful writer, and she has a new novel next year, so that is quite exciting, because I think it's been quite a while since she's published a novel herself. I think she's been involved with translating and writing books in Italy for a while. Then going back to 2007, there's Man Gone Down by Michael Thomas. Not read that. Out Stealing Horses by Per Peterson. I've not read that either. The Savage Detectives, another book by Roberto Bellano. I love rolling my R's, so sorry, that's very silly. I've not read The Savage Detectives either. Then We Came to the End by Joshua Ferris. My partner absolutely loved this novel, but I haven't read it. I read another novel by him, which I really enjoyed, and I always get mixed up with the two novels for some reason. But I haven't read Then We Came to the End yet, a novel about sort of office life, and I think that's such an interesting perspective to take. So I would like to go back and read this novel. Then there's also Tree of Smoke by Dennis Johnson, and I've not read that either. So yeah, I think this is sort of showing that there was a period of years where I was reading, but not so much current fiction. I was reading a lot of older fiction, and so not keeping up with the times. So yeah, it's interesting how getting involved with talking about books online, I just naturally read a lot more newer. So and so going back to 2006, there's Absurdistan by Gary Shettingart, which I've not read and hadn't really heard of. There's The Collected Stories by Amy Hempel, which I do have a copy of this, and I did read a number of the stories and remember really enjoying them, but they haven't really stuck in my mind so much. There's The Emperor's Children by Claire Massoud, which I've not read. The Lay of the Land by Richard Ford, which I haven't read. I've read a number of his fiction and have enjoyed his fiction before. I love his novel Canada, but I've not read this. There's Special Topics in Calamity Physics by Marisha Pessel, which, yeah, I've not read that either. Then going back to 2005, there is Kafka on the Shore by Haruki Murakami. I've not read that, and yeah, I've wanted to go back and read Murakami again. I know he's sort of problematic, and yeah, a lot of people have issues with him, but his fiction is so enjoyable. I think I'd really enjoy going back and reading his fiction. There's On Beauty by Zadie Smith, which I really enjoyed and appreciated, but didn't absolutely love, as some of her other fiction, like Swing Time or White Teeth, though I did definitely enjoy this more than The Autograph Man. I just remember really not enjoying The Autograph Man all that much, but yeah, I thought On Beauty was really good. There's Prep by Curtis Sittenfeld. I've not read that. Saturday by Ian McEwan. This is a novel that I think other people look back on it, or if they read it now, might feel it's slightly more problematic than it was at the time, sort of following this man in his day of his life. I remember the way it ends, especially towards the end, the way a pregnant woman is treated it was quite dodgy. I think that's the right novel. Isn't that in Saturday? Yeah, I thought that was kind of gross how it ended. Then there's Veronica by Mary Gaitskill. I've not read that, but I did read a short book by Mary Gaitskill last year, which I really enjoyed, and I've been wanting to read more of her fiction. Then finally, going back to 2004, a long time ago, there's Gilead by Marilyn Robinson, which I did read at the time or in a few years after that, and I sort of appreciated it. I thought it was interesting, but I didn't love it. And so yeah, I've been wanting to go back and reread that since the fourth book in that series came out this year. And then there is The Master by Colm Toibin, and I love this novel so much. I made a video a little while ago talking about my favorite fiction, and this is the novel that really does stand out for me, and I think is so extraordinary the way Henry James' life in that novel, and just brought it to life and gave a whole new depth to this historical man who we know his fiction so well, but not the man himself, because he was so private, and the way he did that I thought was so beautifully done. There's The Plot Against America by Philip Roth, which I thought was a wonderful, extraordinary novel. I really enjoyed. I don't love Philip Roth's fiction quite so much, but this historical novel, sort of looking at a sort of alternate history, I thought was so well done. There's Runaway by Alice Munro, which I think I did read at the time. I get sort of confused with her short fiction of which books and which stories I've read and not read. I think I did read some of these stories, at least some of them. And yeah, I think she's an extraordinary writer, and a writer that, I really want to go back and reread, because I think that'll be really beneficial. There's Snow by Orhan Pamuk, which I've not read. And then there is War Trash by Ha Jin, which I've not read either. So interestingly, they picked 6 books that year for their top fiction choices. So they've I think the New York Times for quite a long time they've been publishing their best books of the year, but it's only starting that year were they publishing their top 10. So yeah, it's really interesting looking back on these lists and seeing what stands out and sort of stands the test of time, and which books have sort of faded into the background and aren't read as much these days. So yeah, that's another reason why I think these lists are so interesting, because it's sort of a document that you can look back on and see how these books have stood up or not over time. And so yeah, that was sort of fun and interesting to look at. But I'll put a link to the article below, so you can have a look through it, but also look at some of the nonfiction choices, which are really interesting. But yeah, personally, I'm just not as familiar with them. So I'll leave you here. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you have any thoughts about any of these books in the comments below. Ones that I haven't read, if you'd recommend that I read them, or ones that are your favorites as well and you think really stand out and stand the test of time. And if you agree with their top 5 fiction choices for this year as well, let me know in the comments. We can have a discussion. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.